So I'm going to ask you all to take a moment for a second and close your eyes. Everybody, I'm going to close mine too. And think about the first time that you entered a science lab or you heard about the scientific method. I remember I was in 5th grade and my teacher was Mrs. Kane. And she had all of these gigantic poster boards. They were neon green and yellow and orange and all this. And it talked all about hypotheses and observation and coming up with a plan that you were going to go test. And how were you going to drive that experiment? What was your lab plan when you walked in there? Now, some of you, I'm sorry if that was anxiety producing. That might have been a little bit. But nonetheless, stay in that sort of mindset today as we go through the next sort of 20 minutes or so, because I really do think it's important that we become marketing scientists, that we embrace our inner love and joy of math and experimentation, as well as storytelling. So as I mentioned, I have 2 young boys. Jack is 5.5 and Nicholas is 4. And as I was preparing last night, because they're always interested in, oh, you go to all these meetings, Mama, what do you do every day? And I said, oh, well, let me tell you about something that I'm going to talk about tomorrow. And what do you think, I asked them, I said, what do you think a scientist is? Or what does a scientist do? And Jack raised his hand, because now, we're in kindergarten. So he's raising his hand and he said, a scientist discovers new things. And I said, okay, that's a really great answer. And then I turned to my 4-year-old and I said, Nicholas, what do you think a scientist does? And he said, they create great masterpieces. And I'm like, you're 4 years old, right? Okay. It was a very proud moment for me, but I think it really encapsulates not only their individual personalities, but that blend of art and science that is necessary for us to be successful. So if you'll humor me for a little bit, we're going to go on a journey. I'm a recovering English major, as my team knows, and I love to bring in literature references. Has everybody read, seen, heard about To Kill a Mockingbird? Maybe you've been so lucky to see it on Broadway. I'm very jealous if you have. But, one thing that we really want to think about is empathy and what we are doing. And I love this quotation because I think it underscores that so nicely. Is you really never know someone until you climb into his skin and walk around in it. And that's nice, from a theoretical perspective. And I hope, too, that we would be so lucky to have the insatiable curiosity of Scout and the tenacity and ethical moral compass of Atticus in our pursuits. But what does this really look like when you take it into practice? Now, so for those of you who raised your hand and you said, oh, I'm kind of in the startup-y, smaller company, maybe I'm the only person doing product marketing, that was my position. So right before I came to Morningstar, I worked for a startup here in Chicago called Timshell. And we built all of the back-end marketing automation APIs for Hillary Clinton's campaign in 2016. But when I joined the firm as the first marketing hire, it was a wonderful group of very experienced engineers and product folks. My role was to say, okay, well, we've built this platform that has been scaled to the highest levels of, presidential debates and campaigns, et cetera. We've put $80 million through a monetization API in, one night. How do we take that to 1.2 million nonprofits all over this country who effectively do the same thing? They take donations, they sign up supporters, they host events, all these. So the use cases and the product, really the same thing, but the curious case is that, right, nonprofits don't always have a lot of money or capital that is sort of excess over what they're already doing for their services. And they're not always that technologically savvy. I can't expect that the best engineers from Google are going to necessarily show up in a very small nonprofit in the city of Chicago doing fantastic work nonetheless, but those two things don't just generally come together. So what I had to think about is, okay, first I'm going to go to LinkedIn. who do I know in the nonprofit space? I need to better understand who they are, how they're motivated, what their budgets look like, what kind of technical capacity they have. Because I don't know, show of hands, maybe many of you have been involved in situations where you already have an existing product and you might be taking it into a new category or a new market segment, or you're going down market. And you have to really think about, how do I shift my understanding of this completely new market segment? The positioning might still be the same. The functionality might still be the same, but the way in which those individuals are going to use and get value out of that platform, product, service, et cetera, is going to be very different. And I think, sometimes we underestimate the value of the networks that we've already built. And so frankly, going to LinkedIn or doing a quick Google search for people that you went to school with, for people that you might have worked with in the past, for your neighbors, your friends, your family, et cetera, as a starting place, can be a good opportunity to get on the phone with 10 to 15 people. Make sure you go into those phone conversations asking the same kinds of questions, so you have a very consistent evaluation criteria, so you have that more scientific approach to whom you're speaking to and then the insights that you gather. And then ultimately, after you get to that kind of 10 to 15 people and you're speaking to them, 15, 30 minutes at a time, I find you reach a point of diminishing returns where you start to see the same patterns over and over again. So you can begin to illuminate and elucidate your hypothesis of who these people are, what they care about, how are they motivated, how are they incentivized, what problems do they have, and ultimately, how much might they be willing to pay for a solution to those problems. Then you got to scale it, right? So you got to start doing the surveys. Survey says, go out and talk to 100 people, go out and talk to 1,000 people. How do you get to that statistical significance? Now, I also worked at Disney Parks, which is quite the opposite end of the spectrum of a very small startup in the political technology space. When you're at a much larger company, and many of you all raised your hands and said you were, you start having access to PhD statisticians. You start having access to more sophisticated databases, something maybe like Qualtrics or Adobe Analytics or those types of things. Or frankly, with Disney, we just had tens of millions of people coming to every single property that we owned, that you get to a point where data becomes a little bit overwhelming. And so you have to have a group dedicated to analyzing, okay, I hear these sort of qualitative insights, let me back that up with the quantitative aspects of it. So this is where you get into a little bit more sophisticated analytics. Now, if you fall somewhere in between, I also worked at a company called Jive Software that was more like, $300 million run rate, 500 employees type of thing, where you have maybe a couple people in product marketing, maybe you have maybe one person doing market research, competitive intelligence, and you might just have to outsource this, right? You start looking for an agency who has a little bit more knowledge and sophistication, but frankly, you don't have the wherewithal, the bandwidth, the time to go out and recruit those, thousands of people that you need to talk to get to statistical significance. But this is what is definitely really important. So now you have your sort of qualitative insights, you have the quantitative insights. Now you're starting to put together a pretty good sense of who these people are, how many of those people are out there, right? When you're putting together your market segmentation, generally we always talk about what's the total addressable market that we have access to. And then what percentage of that market do we already have perhaps as clients? And if it's a totally new market, maybe you don't have any, which is fine. Then you want to look at what kind of discount might we want to take for competitors in this landscape? Am I a new entrant into an existing market? Am I creating a new category from scratch? Perhaps I already, had some sort of footprint into that market and I maybe have one or two competitors out there. Whatever you think is reasonable, you really want to get to a sense for not only for your own product marketing and definition of that market segment and target audience, but also insofar as creating those goals with your sales team. So this might sound a little bit controversial, but we've managed to do it here at Morningstar. So, our product marketing team actually signs up for revenue goals every year on the P&L. And so we don't necessarily have a quota per se, and we're not getting paid out commissions, but we are one-for-one aligned with what those sales goals are on an annual basis. And we also associate our budget to that. I think that is so important, but you have to start with an understanding of what that sort of serviceable market really is. So that total market, less your clients, less that sort of competitive discount, then you have a realistic understanding and a basis and a foundation to have those conversations with your sales team. So that's the who. And thank you, Mr. Edison here. That's where you start out with. And then the why. And this is so important. I know many of you all have probably watched Simon Sinek's, start with the why. If you haven't, Google it. It's a great YouTube video to watch. But this is really your positioning. So you understand whom you're serving, what their pain points are. You have a relatively good understanding of the competitive landscape. You have an understanding of what your core competencies are as an organization and how you want to go to market. That needs to be your why. How am I different in this market? Am I different because I've got a 35-year history of serving financial advisors and as well as individual investors and everything across the value chain? Am I different because I have the only patented technology that solves this particular problem? Those are the types of questions that you need to answer. And I've bolded them and made these bigger because without the who and the why, you might as well not care about the rest, right? Because everything else sort of falls from that rather trite but North Star at this point. So then we get into a little bit more of, the what, the where, and the when. So what is it? Is it a product or is it a service, right? Is it a combination of the two? How are you actually going to sell this? Where are you going to distribute it? Is this a retail play? Is this an online play? Is it software as a service? Am I, just taking a credit card? Do you have to talk to a salesperson, et cetera? And then also the when, and I think you all, have heard many of these stories before, like, 80 to 90% of startups fail globally. And the number one reason that they fail when we, look at some of that research is that they didn't have product market fit. But I think product market fit is not only a function of these first four, but also really, really the when. When is the right time that you have that market intelligence, that you know that you're going to be successful, that people are willing to pay for this type of solution because Excel is just not cutting it anymore. If I had $1 for every time I sold against Excel, we might not be standing here. And then how and how much. And as you start to get into, I think, more maybe sophisticated or complex type of software as a service, you look at, here at Morningstar, you look at maybe someone like an Adobe, Oracle, Salesforce, where you start to get a lot of different distribution channels, third-party consulting firms that are coming in that you're working with. Maybe you have a partner marketing function, or maybe you're just going direct to that buyer. You really need to figure out where are you going to start and then scale. I know we had some difficulty, I think, to be perfectly frank with you, at Jive when we were trying to do this, where we were really good at our own internal sales team or external sales team as well. And then when we tried to scale up, we really started bumping into a lot of those third-party systems integrators, for example, that, well, we're already a Microsoft shop. Well, we're already a Salesforce shop. Well, we're already a such and such, and so on and so forth. I really want to underscore that those types of relationships take a long time to cultivate and to make sure that you're very well positioned relative to what those other products or services they might be offering, as well as think about what niches those particular consulting firms offer. So just something to ponder when you're thinking about how I'm actually going to go to market. And then how much pricing we could talk about for days, and I would love to, because it's one of my favorite topics. But pricing is very much a mirror reflection of your who and your why. Certainly your what as well, what are you selling, but your who and your why, because pricing is that sort of external peg to the potential value or the perceived value of what you're going to receive, right? So I'll give you an example with Disney Parks. We had an entire revenue management team that, PhD again, all across the board, thinking about what are all of the pricing levers? How many various combinations of packages can you have with parks passes, with food, with extra entertainment, with on-property hotel stays, with transportation to the cruise line, with all of these different things that come together. And without that deep understanding of, in Disney parlance, the guest, we could have totally made a mess of all of those things. There are certain different segments. Someone who is, affluent and has really high brand affinity might be willing to pay a little bit more to skip all the lines and have the backstage experience, right? Whereas someone who is just able to take their family once in a lifetime to Walt Disney World, they have to save for years and years and years. And so they're going to be really much more interested in a consolidated package. Like, make it easy for me. This is my one shot. I may be willing to go a little bit extra and do something that's a little bit more premium. But for the most part, I need to stick to my budget. So you're going to need to think about pricing and packaging, especially when you have a multitude of different segments that you're trying to serve. Now, if you just have one, that empathy still doesn't go away, but you also might want to think about, okay, let's go back to the example of the nonprofits. Maybe there's, maybe Moms Demand Action is just getting started, and then they ultimately want to scale. So how do you position your packaging and pricing to map to how your clients are thinking about their own growth and how you can be a partner in that growth along with them? Okay. So we've talked to people, we've gotten curious, we've talked to them at scale. We've put together our hypothesis across all of these different areas. Now the fun really begins. You get into the lab. Again, sorry if anybody has a little bit of anxiety about that. I did myself. But you get into the lab, you think about, how am I actually going to test out all of these different aspects that we've just laid forth? All of the research that we've done. What does that look like? For us marketers, and it'll be interesting, I'd love to see kind of a show of hands. How many of you all are also responsible for demand generation, lead gen, actually executing on the marketing programs? Okay, kind of a mixed bag. We here at Morningstar are responsible for end-to-end, go-to-market strategy, demand generation, events marketing, kind of all in one stream. And so I'm not saying that it's necessarily easier to see the fruits of your labor or to at least see some of that immediate data, because I think the predicate is it's still so important that you are working with, if you do have a separate demand gen team, you do have a separate Marcom team, or even frankly with the sales teams as well, that you're in 100% lockstep to say, let's be very specific about what the objective is. And this is one place where I've seen in my career that people get tripped up around vanity metrics. Right? They'll say, oh, well, we sent out this email and it was this many clicks and this many opens and this many, downloads, or this many people went to the website. Somebody's laughing there, right? And we kind of forget to go all the way to the end. What is the purpose of what we're doing? Okay, we're trying to build a business here, right? We're trying to drive revenue at the end of the day. And so what I would really encourage everybody here and encourage my team to do as well is to say, pick something that you feel like is really realistic. We're going to go close 100 deals this year. And maybe your time horizon differs, what have you. We're going to close 100 deals, and let's back into how we need to get there. We've already got all of our messaging, our positioning, kind of that plan that we worked out. But if you all have been tracking, or you have a team that tracks all of those sort of conversion rates, and if you looked at Serious Decisions or Pragmatic Marketing, there's a lot of information kind of out there. But how do I back into the math of I need to close 100 deals? Okay, what's my conversion rate from opportunity to close? What's my conversion rate from sales accepted lead to opportunity? What's my conversion rate from marketing lead to sales lead, et cetera? You can kind of back into those numbers. So again, at least everyone has a seat at the table at the same time: sales, marketing, product, service, right? And understands, okay, this is our one singular goal. Because without that in mind, it's really difficult to ascertain if you hit that or not, or how far off you are from the mark. And then, one thing that we do here at Morningstar, and I've done in the past as well, is having more of a weekly touch base that's purely operational. Let's look at pipeline development. How are we tracking? Oh, we just launched, this new campaign into the market. Certainly you want to look at some of those quote unquote vanity metrics from a directional perspective, but ultimately, we had this competitive takeout campaign. Did we see it show up in additional sales over the course of a week, a month, a quarter, et cetera? So always going back to tying to that business value. I think that's a really important point as well, so that you can continue to illuminate for the rest of the company, which sometimes is a challenge for us, what value product marketing is bringing to the firm. And then lastly, I always think about, what are the conclusions? And you have to take action. We're not just experimenting for fun, although it can be fun, but we're just not doing this for our own health, right? We are trying to test, learn, and iterate, get to another place. So if you all pardon my, child of the 80s reference to Back to the Future, but, once you have launched your DeLorean at 80, however many miles per hour, going straight into the street, you've launched your new product. Generally, as you all know, it took an act of God, a lightning strike, to hit a building, to connect the wires at the exact same time to get that car to go, right? So you have spent all of this time in getting ready for the launch, and that's just day one. That is just day one. So you have to think about what am I going to do on day 2 and day 15 and day 30 to keep this going. And so that is why I really try to employ and implore my team here and in other teams that I've led to embrace this idea of the scientific method of testing, learning, and actually iterating on it, and then sharing those learnings out, bringing more people into the fore. And I'll leave you because, as I mentioned, I worked at Disney parks, and once you work at Disney, the Disney never really comes out of you. So one of my favorite stories is the launch of Disneyland. So in the early 1950s, Walt Disney had effectively run a huge venture capital campaign. All sorts of television campaigns have gotten all this funding from a variety of networks. He created the Wonderful World of Disney series. He was going to launch and open Disneyland live, broadcasting this live. And so he's, the night before, walking through the park, his various sort of quad of Imagineers, and they turned to him and they said, "Mr. Disney, we have a slight problem. The cement is not quite dry on all of the sidewalks and everything going through Disneyland." So if you pause for a moment and you think about 1950s attire, generally women are in high heels and dresses, and men are in very nice slacks or suits and dress shoes. Wet cement in the middle of Southern California in the middle of the summer, probably not a good thing, not a good combination. And he said, "Oh, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. We have some of the, I'll just keep everybody and all the press and everyone else into this one area." Well, what he didn't really anticipate is that while he thought he had sort of a lockdown on how many people actually had tickets to the event, many people actually created counterfeit tickets. So there were over 30,000, I think, people that actually had these counterfeit tickets to get into Disneyland on the first day, which would have exacerbated this problem of wet cement. Nonetheless, he said, "Move forward, go forth. We got to open it up. All this international press is here." And so there were hundreds and thousands of people that rushed through those gates at Disneyland, and women that were getting stuck in the cement because it was so wet or on their clothing, etc. But Mr. Disney deftly said, "You know what? We're not shutting it down. We're moving forward. We will test, learn, and iterate. I will usher them into other areas of the park, into this nice restaurant, give them some free things, and everything will be well." But can you imagine if he would have said the night before Disneyland opened, "Oh, just shut it down. We're done. We can't ship it. It's not ready." What this amazingly iconic brand would maybe have not have become because of taking that risk. So I encourage you to think about, when you kind of have some of those days where you're like, oh man, we're going to miss this launch or we miss this thing, just get it out there. Nothing will ever be completed and I love this quotation, it will continue to grow as long as there's imagination left in the world. So we think it's kind of fun to do the impossible here at Morningstar with my team. And I encourage you all to go forth and embrace your inner scientist. Thank you. We have a moment maybe for a question or two, but otherwise I'm happy to introduce our next speaker. Yes, let's see. Yeah? Okay, I'll respond or repeat it.
How do you iterate when you don't have time for people?
How do you iterate when you don't have time for people? Yeah, I've been in your shoes. So essentially, you do it more on like an hourly or daily basis, frankly. So when I was at Tim Shell, I did have one person, but who kind of wrote everything for including like copy in the product as well as marketing copy. So I think what we did was, in a small company like that, I mean, we were 15 people in a space in River North, and no one really had meetings. That was kind of the nice thing, actually, of being in a smaller company. And so it was always just kind of constant ideation and throwing things against the wall, putting things out there. We also, like I said, had a very robust API and engineering team. And so getting that data back very quickly of, hey, we put this thing up on the website, are people actually clicking into it? At one point in time, which I don't know if this is so greatly advised, but the engineers hooked up a bot to Slack. So I could actually see anytime somebody came to the website, submitted information, or actually purchased a product, because it was just credit card only. It pinged on Slack. So insofar as iterating and getting that like near real-time data, those were some of the things that we employed. But it really did take, as I mentioned before, like everybody needed to be on the same page with what was working. All the two salespeople reported into me as well. So I had the ability to kind of train them nearly real time and say, oh, we just heard this on a call. Great, let's switch it up and move this other call. So is that helpful? Okay, well, you have a sales team of 300. When you don't have time to iterate, meaning people just aren't interested in it, or it's just
and the product marketing team is 5 people.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that is a little bit more of a challenge. I mean, I would say the number of products is quite overwhelming. One, are there ways to consolidate or package those products in a different way where you could get a little bit more scale out of what you're trying to do? With a team of 300, that's nearly equivalent to what we have here at Morningstar and what we had at Jive too. Honestly, the iteration was more on a quarterly basis, anything that was much larger. But then I also always had time on the Monday sales calls. And so that was an opportunity, especially at Jive, where I could do more in the moment training. Hey, we heard this competitor just did such and such. Let's give you some talking points and get that out into the market. And then I would have follow-up calls. I sort of had my people, right? My 3 or 4 salespeople that were kind of the inner voice of everything going on in sales that I could reach out to and say, did this work? Did it not? And generally, if people feel like they're bought in, they will give you that feedback. So we could chat more later. That's an interesting problem. Okay. I want to keep to time. Fantastic. Let me just pull up the app.